Coming up next on the Maine Challenge, I talk with three amazing women who have run and won for local office. Welcome, everyone. My name is Betsy Sweet, and I'm very excited tonight to be hosting a program that is incredibly important right now. And this is a program that is a joint production of the Maine Challenge, which is my weekly cable TV show, along with the Maine Democratic Party. Women have been taking an increasingly important role in politics as we move along, and as we look at the mess that politics has been for the last 4 years anyway, but for a long time. I think that we are seeing that it is women's voices and women in all elected offices that are bringing a new way of doing politics, a new perspective to politics, and it's really an important time for us to think about it. Now, when we think about women in politics, often our minds go to the politicians we know: Nancy Pelosi, Alexandria Cortez, Shelley Pingree, Olympia Snowe, even Margaret Chase Smith here in Maine. But we know that where a lot of the work gets done and some of the most important work that affects your life and my life is really at the local level. It is really where things start to happen. It is also where we grow our most wonderful politicians, and where women get the chance to bring their life experience, to bring who they are, how they live, their families, everything into the political arena, and then be able to grow from there to move on to state level and national level and international level work. So, you know, the quote on the screen when we started was, "They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds." And I feel like one of the things that's the most exciting to me, even in my most discouraged days here in politics, I think about all the seeds that have been planted all across Maine and across this country, on local school boards and charter commissions and town councils and city councils, and just all across this state, with all these amazing people, amazing women who are starting and getting their feet wet in terms of the political process and doing the really important work of making government work for us, not against us, at all levels. And so I am very excited to have three extraordinary women with us tonight who are doing exactly that. And they are Flavia Oliveira, who is on the City Council of Waterville. She is a mom of four. She has her degree from Thomas College in political science. She has interned with the Maine Equal Justice Project, and she is planning to go to law school, I believe, if that's right, Flavia, trying anyway, in the fall, which would be awesome. So thank you so much for joining us, Flavia. And then Bev Uhlenhake, who is a friend and has been, she was the mayor of Brewer. She has run for office herself. She is also now the vice chair of the Democratic Party, and she also has a wife and three kids. And then Lutie Brown, who is like my hope whenever I get discouraged about politics, I think about Lutie. Lutie is a junior at Colby College, and she ran at the age of 19 for the Waterville Charter Commission and got elected. She also is right now, in addition to being on the State Democratic Party Committee, being a junior at Colby, doing all of that work, she is also the president of the Maine College Dems, Democrats. So I am so thrilled to have all three of you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And more importantly, thank you for all the amazing work that you are doing in your local areas and what you're doing to contribute to the entire state. So thanks for joining us. So there's been a lot written and talked about in terms of the sort of structural problems for women running up for office, raising money and, a lot of that kind of stuff. And I'm hoping that tonight we can talk a little bit not so much about those things, but about some of what the personal things are. What got you to run? What were the internal barriers? What were the internal conversations you had with yourself? And we'll get into that. But if we could just start by each one of you just telling us a little bit about why you ran, what you're working on right now, and why you decided to do this thing that a lot of people think about. They say run for politics and they're like, oh no, not me, I don't want anything to do with it. But you have taken the plunge and are contributing in this big way. So Flavia, can you start us off?
Yes, first I want to thank you, Betsy, for having us over here tonight. Like you said, my name is Flavia Olivera. I'm a city council from Waterville, Ward 2. I also sit on the Maine Dem's Grievance Committee. I am a parent ambassador. I also sit on the KVCAT Board of Directors. And right now I'm doing a little bit of work over at Thomas College and over at here at the Waterville with the Task Force in Equity. I started off with the interest of politics over at Educare. I was a mom there, and I had my little son over at the center. So I applied for the policy to become part of the policy there. And I was elected as secretary my first year. I was really determined to make it a change. So I reapplied again and became the chair my following year. And as I was graduating out of the program, they started with a parent ambassador program, which pretty much what it does, it trains parents to advocate for themselves and for their children. And from there, I just got connected. I got connected over at KVCC, where I went and finished my associates. And they referred me to this amazing program over at New Maine Leadership Program in Orono, which has 4 days there, and I came back like a completely transformed woman, I should say. I learned I met so many diverse in women, and it was just a very, very interesting program, very nonpartisan, and like I said, a very educational program. And from there, I went on to Thomas College, which I graduated in political science. And that's where my because of having New Maine leaders, it kind of exposed me to policy even more. So when I graduated, and I was asked more than once to run, and I said no, I didn't have the time, I don't have childcare, all the excuses that comes. And after I graduated Thomas, I said, let me give it a shot. So I ran in 2019 as a special election to fill in. I won that election. I think it was about 57% of the vote. And I ran against 2 males. So that was really interesting and really exciting for me. And then this year, I got re-elected again as Ward 2 City Council for another 3 years. So with all that excitement, on top of that, I also ran for the grievance committee, and I just won that election again this year. So all of this is just for me, for being the first of my family to ever run for politics, to ever take the step to go to college and really follow my dreams. This is a life a life transformance for me and my family at the time. Yeah.
Oh, that is so inspiring. I mean, that's incredible, Flavia. It's just it's awesome. And I want to come back to a bunch of the things that you said that we're all going to talk about. But let me turn it to you, Bev. You want to talk a little bit about how you got started and decided finally to take the plunge?
Sure. So my start. So for the people in the audience, before this started, we were talking a little bit about what was going on in 1984. And that's actually the first memory I have about politics. I used to talk with my dad all the time about politics. We loved it. He was a farmer, a factory worker. He was undereducated by all measures, but we loved talking about politics. And he was a union guy. And so that's how I started out in the Democratic Party. In 1984, I remember having the conversation. This is my distinct memory of the first conversation with him that I remember, and it was about Geraldine Ferraro. And in that conversation, he said, Bev, women can do this thing called politics. And, I caught a bug, and I definitely, I couldn't imagine myself actually ever doing politics, but I loved talking about it and I loved being involved. So fast forward, go to graduate school, get a job here in Maine, and it was 1997, 1998. And I needed to meet people, and there were equality campaigns going on. And I decided this is a way to get to know people who believe the same things I do, and got involved. And then those led to more campaigns and led to the marriage campaigns. And then it got to about 2013, and I looked at city council, and I was already on the planning board, which was an appointed position. But I thought, you know, I've learned how to do this campaign thing, and they're making decisions that I know how to, you know, I could make these decisions. Why don't I do this? And so I did, and I ran, and I won, and served for 6 years. Retired after my second year as mayor, and now serving on the school board of trustees. I'm also serving in this role of the Maine Democratic Party vice chair. And for me right now, what's so fun is watching folks like Lutie and Flavia really grow and succeed and run. And it's a lot of fun to be a part of that. Let me just give a couple quick statistics. What we know about women in politics is when they run, they win. Particularly for these local offices. We have some basic data about municipal offices. We know that there are about 430 women, female Democrats serving in local offices. There are about 212 Republican women serving in local offices throughout the state of Maine. So a lot of women out there making a change, helping us talk about, you know, childcare programs and schools and potholes, because potholes and trash collection are really important too. And those are women's issues. Those are women's issues. These are all things that we need to be paying attention to. Along the lines of watching women run and win, I just want to throw out there that the Maine Democratic Party has a couple really great programs out there, free trainings for folks who want to run, and that's the Run Local program. I know that we'll post that information at the end, so if folks want to get involved in that. We'd love to have you. There are also other programs out there like Emerge, like the new leadership program, which is not about running, but it's about politics. Actually, I have my Margaret Chase Smith bobblehead doll sitting behind me from that program. So lots of great things happening in here in the state of Maine. No reason not to get involved.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome, Bev. And I do remember when you were mayor of Brewer, people saying, hey, does anyone know this really cool woman who's the mayor of Brewer? Like Brewer, who's like, you know, like I live in Augusta, you know, it's like, oh yeah, it's way, way up there. You know, it's like, there's a cool woman in Brewer, really? And so they're like, she's really hot stuff. Like, and I was like, oh, huh, how about that? And it was,
there are lots of cool women in Brewer.
I believe that. I believe that. And speaking of cool women, Lutie, I want to turn it over to you. And I just have to say, you know, as a candidate myself, one of the, you know, you go to hundreds of events, and which is part of the joy for me. And I went to the Colby Dems. They were having a, I think it was when I was running for governor, and we had met before, but and there was a forum. And you know those people that just stand out in a crowd, and you just like somehow you know their face, and you're attracted to their smile, and they just have this like energy that's like supersized and perfect and wonderful. And so that's my memory. That's my first memory of meeting Lutie. And so, so Lutie, let me turn it over to you. So you ran when you were a college student in a local town. I mean, there are lots of things going on there. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Yeah, I have a lot going on, that's for sure. And thank you so much, Betsy. And I remember that interaction too as well, actually, because part of why I was so motivated to not only come to Colby, but also to get involved in Maine politics is actually your primary campaign for governor, because I listened to your speeches and I noticed your compassionate approach to politics, and that really inspired me and stood out from what I was used to in New York City. But I can start at the beginning. So similar to Bev, I actually have some union roots with politics. So I grew up speaking politics in the household. My dad worked for a union and his mother was a union organizer in Long Island as a teacher. And my mom was an immigrant from Taiwan who immigrated straight into the South Bronx. And I have a kind of fun Maine connection there in that when she was coming to America, she didn't know what the South Bronx was. She didn't really know what she was getting herself into, but she met these really amazing Filipino colleagues who loved Maine. So after she worked about 6 weeks straight in her first couple weeks in America, just getting her foothold, they told her they were gonna give her a treat. So they took her up to Acadia and took her up to Bar Harbor, and she had her first ever lobster, and she fell in love with Maine. So growing up, Maine kind of became this wonderful retreat for not only for her, but for the whole families who would try to come up on long weekends once every couple of years and do the same Jordan Pond little hike, because they're from New York City, so we're not great at all hiking, but we always could do Jordan Pond at Acadia. And I hold that really close to my heart. And I just wanted to give her a little shout out there, especially with everything going on. And she's going through a lot right now with all the AAPI violence. But
Yeah.
I guess starting from how I got involved in Maine politics, I got right to campus and became super energized about all this again, because I'd heard about Betsy coming into the semester and going into my college experience. And I was like, I want to be like her, and I want to uplift candidates like that, not just at the state level, but locally. So jumped right into Colby Dems and met Lily Herman, who was co-president at the time, another really incredible champion, and Carolyn Jones, our local engagement chair. And they really lifted me up. And Carolyn was kind of body woman for Sarah this fall, and Lily is currently legislative aide and did really a lot of the magic of the Maine Senate Dems this election cycle. So they're two really incredible, accomplished women who brought me in under their wing and made me feel like I had a voice, even as a first year, a couple weeks into college and a couple weeks into living in Waterville. And I knocked on doors every weekend and met Henry Beck. I didn't know he was as big a deal as I just didn't know he was a huge deal. And he was just this nice guy who would drive around on the weekends and knock on doors with me. And they really became my support network going into politics, and have still continued to be my main supporters and cheerleaders. And in the spring of my first year at Colby, a couple of residents decided to challenge the students' right to vote in the city of Waterville. So that is when I probably achieved my first ever public idea or conception of me. So I was testifying on behalf of Colby students, not just because I had helped register them as a member of Colby Dems, but also because I cared. In my testimony, I talked about how much students care about the city of Waterville and how much time y'all put in. And it also achieved some notoriety from the mayor and other folks, because I was reporting on local politics for the local paper in a nonpartisan fashion, but they didn't like that I was testifying about our fundamental right to vote. So then from there, going into my sophomore fall here at Colby when I was 19, so that was fall of 2019, is when we had a candidate running for city charter commission for Ward 3. And she was a former city councilor, a really incredible candidate, but she had decided not to run 2 days before the petition deadline. So this was never my plan to get into politics. And I've never been very successful in student government elections. In third grade, I got 2 votes for third grade representatives. So I did not really go into this positive that I was going to win. But our candidate dropped out 2 days before the filing deadline, and there was an opening that we needed to fill for a candidate to challenge a former chair of the Republican committee. And it was really important that we had people on the city charter commission, because that's revising the governing document of the city. And we had to make sure that we had the right voices on there to advocate for the community. So our board is predominantly made up of Colby students. And because I'd been one of the students testifying on behalf of the students' right to vote, and because I've been doing a lot of on-the-ground work for all of our local candidates, and I've been going to the monthly constituent sessions with Colleen Madigan, our state rep, I came to mind as one of the candidates they contacted. So Colleen herself and Rian, who's another really great advocate here in Waterville Dems, contacted me. I slept on the decision and got up on Thursday morning. The petition's due Friday at 5 p.m. And on Thursday morning said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So then I spent the next 2 afternoons collecting our 50 signatures necessary, or 25 necessary, but 50 to be careful. And I walked the entire ward for 2 afternoons after class, got out of class at 2:15 and walked the rest of the ward. And just talked to residents. I wanted to hear what they had to say, hear how they felt about me, this 19-year-old newbie coming in and trying to represent them. And they responded really positively, and I really appreciated that. And if they hadn't, I wouldn't have run. But I also took their ideas about the charter to the actual commission when I eventually was elected, and that meant a lot. And then after that, I served my full year term, but since then, at the same time, I was also local engagement chair and now co-president of Colby Dems. And I'm now president of Maine College Dems, so I oversee all of our federations, all of our chapters statewide, and I also serve as inclusivity as the Deputy Director for Inclusivity, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility for College Democrats of America nationwide. So that's also where I'm really working on fostering similar communities of empowerment at our local chapters, like I was able to get with Lily and Carolyn. So we care about not only welcoming women in theory, but actually uplifting us, hosting programs like this one to create and also to facilitate mentorship and hear real stories, not just about the great happy moments, but also about the challenges and how we overcame them. And to honor our work as women in politics, not just on the campaign trail, but also in all the other work we do and all the other challenges we overcome, because those deserve to be applauded as well. So that's something I'm working on nationwide now at the Institute and all of our chapters because it meant so much to me.
Wow, that's awesome. That is really awesome. So one thing that you all talked about was being asked to run. So someone coming up to you and saying, hey, why don't you think about this, Flavia? Why don't you think about this, Bev? And I know that you were recruited heavily to run for the Senate, Bev, and Lutie, like, why don't you think about this? And so I want to talk about that, and let me just say, 77% of men who run wake up in the morning and say, I'm going to do this. I want to do this, right? And it's about the same number of women who, or more, actually about 90% of women, says the research, have to be asked repeatedly to do this, as you said, Flavia. So you get asked the question, will you run? And I want to hear, like, let's talk about what goes through your head when someone says, hey, you should run, you should do this. Now, Flavia, you said you a little bit was like, oh, I can't, I got kids, it's too much. What other things, like, sort of, did you say to yourself, like, I don't know if I can do this? What were the things that went through your head? Oops.
Oh.
Oops, you're muted. Hang on a second, you're muted. Let's unmute you. Yeah, there we go. Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing that actually went into my head is my English. I speak English is my second, third language. Yeah. So my English is not a part. So for me, it was that confidence that I was going to speak like Americans. And I was going to it's like, I had to be like, I had to walk like them, be like them. So I was like, I wanted to be my own self. So for me, it was like, how can I be my own self and still do this? So I didn't have quite the confidence there to actually do that. And for me too, it was like my family, my kids. I was juggling school. So childcare, during the day, you can find childcare, but during at night when you have to do it's hard. It's harder to do that. And another thing too was, like I said, time and self-doubt. Yeah. Like doubting myself.
So talk about that self-doubt. Like, so one of the things you said, I think it's so interesting is, you said, I have to be, like, how do I get to be me? Like, because there's so many rules, or we think there's so many rules. Like, if you want to run for office, you have to look a certain way, and you have to speak a certain way, and you have to wear a certain kind of clothes, and you have to hang out with a certain kind of people. And, there's sort of this, and I think we sort of, even though I think we would all say that that's baloney, I think we all have it. Like, oh, I'm too, what, fill in the blank, right? And so, but it sounds like that you had some of that. So Bev and Lutie, was there some of the things that you had as well?
So I will say, for me, when I ran for city council, I was watching them do the job relatively closely, and I knew these folks, and I didn't see them as doing something that I couldn't do. So running for city council didn't seem like that big of a deal. In terms of serving, it was, honestly, it was breaking in as someone who hadn't grown up in town, who was someone who had a really odd last name, which is, not okay if you didn't grow up there. And I was running against people who would, I used to tease Kevin O'Connell, who was always on the same cycle as I was. You could run someone over on Wilson Street and still win, and he could. I was running against, it was Kevin got his seat, and then I was running against everyone else. But it was when I was running for state senate, or thinking about it, and I tried really hard not to run. I tried really hard to get other people to run. And the second time around, there was someone running who was, on the Republican side, who was very anti progressive movements, very anti-gay. I knew my family could become a target. My kids were at that point, they're now preteens, and I thought about what they would hear in the classroom, and what they would hear from their friends, what they would see on YouTube. And those kinds of things were really scary. We bought a security system for our house so that I could run for office. And those kinds of things are a little scary. I will say that I was lucky, and it's not very often that you say, oh, the lesbian in the room is the lucky one, but I had a really good wife, so I didn't have to worry about my kids. I have a really great wife. She was very supportive. There's no worry about, sex
Gender
roles in our house. She can take care of the kids just as well as I can. And so that's what happened in our house. But that whole am I good enough? And am I a good mom putting my kids in this position of exposing the family?
Yeah, to something that's become so toxic, and you don't know. I mean, and I know that, for Flavia and Lutie, there's racism, and there's the gender stuff, there's racism. And, when my former partner ran for the first time in 1984 as the first out lesbian in the country to run, we had to have police sit in our driveway. And we got death threats every single day on the answering machine. Now, luckily, we didn't have children at that time, but, still it was like, oh, this is sort of ugly stuff. I don't know if I want to be part of this. So, but what about you, Lutie? So here you were, and you talked a little bit about being a newcomer to Maine, and you're 19, but people, what were some of the things that you felt?
Yeah, I definitely felt very similar pressures to what Flavia and Bev were talking about. And I guess just to start, it never, as I guess the two of them also said, it really never crossed my mind that I could ever be a candidate. But I thought my role would always be to amplify the voices and messages of other candidates and those other amazing advocates. And my work was just to empower them as candidates, but also to empower their voters and community and hear back from them and connect them to the candidates. I never thought I would be one of the candidates myself, which is how I even got into this work, because I was helping the candidates and then the candidate dropped out. So I had to become the candidate. But all these questions crossed my mind that have already been mentioned. And I also clearly was coming as a college student, not from Maine. I did not grow up here, and I have an odd first name, and my last name doesn't seem to match my skin tone. So, and I also unlike Bev said, I'd been following city council meetings very closely, and thought that I too could do it. I too could make decisions. And since I've been doing all the campaign work, I knew how to talk to community members and hear their feedback and actually incorporate it into legislation, since I'd been doing that for other candidates. So I took that into my actual role when I was on Charter Commission. But really it came down to those cheerleaders again. So Lily Herman, I'm gonna keep coming back to Lily. She was chair of the local Waterville Democratic Committee, and I'd seen what the trolls and the haters had done to her. And I knew that was also going to be coming from me. And that's one of the small things that I kind of had to overcome, but I knew that I had a team there to get me through it, and a team of people who'd also been through the same backlash and the same hate. And I also had them to protect my safety. I might not have had a family here right away, but they were my proxy family. They were my political family who really had my back. And I knew that I was going to come across as too young and thus naive, of course, and from away, not a Mainer by birth, and I'm a woman of color, and I'm still a full-time student. So I knew I was gonna have to balance those challenges just on campus, but even in the classroom, when some of my professors found out that I was running, started to treat me differently. They were like, oh, well, you think you're too good for school, which was definitely not the case. I was just handling basically 2 full-time gigs. I was full-time running for office at 19, but also trying to stay in school with a tough course load. So I was really getting backlash from both sides here, from both angles of academics and community members thinking that I was just the ambitious young woman of color coming from away, trying to take over their town, which really was 100% everything I was trying not to do. I really did not want to run because I knew these barriers were going to be in place. But no one else would step up. And I thought, okay, I guess I will. And it's important that I do. And then a similar thing happened this past summer when there was a point where Flavia, so we're both in Waterville, Flavia was the only woman on city council and the only person of color. And that's, so when people approached me for their opening in Ward 3 to run for city council here in Waterville, and I said, okay, I want to have her back because Flavia had my back. We were at the polls the same day when Flavia got elected to city council for that special election was when I got elected to Charter Commission and with Hillary Koch. So the three of us really had each other's backs at the polls that day. And Flavia's just been such an incredible advocate on city council. So I said, oh, I should jump at this opportunity. But I also remembered, again, what I'd gone through for a year and my labor and time. And I was already exhausted and kind of exploited to do all this advocacy and activism for the marginalized. And I was afraid of burning out and not staying in politics. So, and I think that's another thing that a lot of us have to struggle with as women in politics. So I decided to kind of take a step back, but then to continue doing the work. So I worked really hard to recruit Rebecca Green, who's now run for a different ward, but she's an amazing advocate on city council alongside Flavia. So just kind of translating that frustration into just empowering other women and connecting her with the support network that really had my back my entire time is now also her support network, and I'm part of that. So just even when we don't always say yes to the asking to run for office, passing that along to other women to make them know that like they would be just as great, if not better, in the role, and we could also see them doing the work that we're doing, and we can become their mentors and support network that we had for us to get involved. I think is really important.
Well, you all talked about something that is really important, and I find is that you all started out as organizers, right? You all started out as people who were working on things, and I think that's a thing that's really different for a lot of women, especially at the local level, but I think all women, is that we often start as organizers, like to get the job done. Like we're less interested in power to be like the person, like the power person, right? But just like we got to get stuff done. We got stuff to do here. Like there's problems. We got to fix it. And I think so. So I'm just wondering, Flavia, for you, and Lutie just gave you a great shout out about how important you are on city council. But coming from that kind of organizing background, does that help you once you're there? Does it affect how you do things? I mean, I watched Cori Bush from Missouri and AOC from New York. They were organizers, and so they approach Congress as an organizer, like, okay, who do we need to talk to, and who, and so does that affect you? Do you think that way of being and that knowing those skills has affected your ability to do your job on city council?
I believe so. I started off like my first encounter with organizing was Medicaid expansion. And that brought me statewide. For Medicaid expansion, I went to advocating for childcare and advocating for dental. So advocating on a larger scale allows you to see and meet people in legislative that you would have not met if you were doing just local work. Mm-hmm. And for me, what that did is broaden my network, and it broadened my my exposure to people in politics.
Yeah.
And also too, for me, it kind of it helped me understand what politics was all about. Like for Lutie and Bev, they've been talking about how politics was part of their culture at home. For me, it was completely different. When they asked me to be a city council, I'm like, what is that? What do they do? I actually had to go look it up and see what was a city council. What did they do? Because that's not something that we talked about in the table. Like I said, I'm an immigrant. My mom was the first generation to come to America. So we don't talk about politics. So for me to start off with something as an organizer, to start off with something that I care, it broadened my horizons. So I started off with Medicaid expansion.
Yeah, that's that healthcare issue. And I think that's true for a lot of women, is that there's an issue, something that's like, okay, this issue is driving me so hard that I'm gonna get over the reluctances that you talked about, well, okay, I don't really want to do this. I'm worried about my family. I'm worried about my time, splitting my time, but I care so much about this, and there's that network of people, that support network. So So Bev, for you, was it issues? And you said, I know you said you have a personal network, but I know you also have a big network, in the town and now statewide. How important is that?
The network is invaluable, and it's invaluable for a couple of reasons. One is um, you need to surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth,
Mm.
um, and make sure that they're not just supporters, that they're also people who will say, or they support you enough to tell you that
No, don't do that. Right. You're really off on that.
get some honest feedback.
Yeah.
In my job, I'm in the business world. I work in real estate, in commercial real estate, which is, so very much to the right in terms of a whole lot of politics. Most of it's Republican. So I'm surrounded most of the day with people who don't necessarily vote the same way I do. And honestly, that is the best thing ever, because one of the things, and I think this also gets back to that organizing, is what you learn when you start with these issues is that you learn not just how to campaign, and that's important too, to know how to go and talk to people at doors is really important, but it's also important to be able to understand where they're coming from and be able to listen and hear and process and then put that into action. The hardest thing for me about losing my Senate campaign was not about not serving. It was about all that information I had in my head from all those people I talked to at all those doors and what their concerns were and how was I going to help? What was I going to do to help solve problems if I wasn't in a role to vote? And that's the thing is that we all need to be the best politicians. It's not about how well you can talk. It's about how well you listen and how well you process what other people need.
Yeah.
And to ask for what you need. That's the other thing with your network is having people around you that you can ask for what you need. I need help. I need someone to give my kids some vegetables today because otherwise they're not going to get them this week.
And
Ask
that's
for what
really,
you need.
and I think that's a really hard thing to do. Like, right? It's really hard to say, here you are putting yourself out there. And then I think how much of it is, how much do we get that sort of, okay, I'm going to put myself out there. And yeah, I have this great network of people when the really bad thing happens. But honestly, I need someone to like change the oil in my car or feed my or bring my kids some carrots and it's really hard. I think it's, I mean, did you guys find it hard, Lutie or Flavia, to say, no, I don't need help with my policy statement on Medicare for all, Medicaid for all. I got that. Could you actually pick up the laundry or could you fold my laundry or could you, do those things as we try and balance? It's so hard to, I think women, especially women who are on top of it and awesome, as you all are, to ask for help and say, no, I just really need someone to take care of the laundry or whatever. Is that true? Does that play out for you?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Flavia.
Yeah, I'm just really, yeah, it does. It plays out for me, like, especially when you try to do it all and you're trying to be super mom and and you just think you have a handle on everything because you're so used to multitasking, and to really take that time to be like, I really need self-care, I really need help. And that's been the hardest for me, is actually doing that.
Yeah, it is really hard. Go ahead, Lutie.
I agree as well. And like Bev said, we know as organizers and as women, we know how to listen and how to empathize and then turn that into actual action. But it's so hard to ask for other people to do that for us, if that makes any sense. Because we, as Flavia said, we think we're supermodel, we're not supermodel, I'm not supermom, but we think we're super enough that we can handle all of this and multitask all of this, and not need to ask for help, because our job is to help others when they ask for help. So I think, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. No, go ahead. Sorry.
I think that one thing that I really learned how to do was to ask for guidance on how to take care of myself. Honestly, I really was doing far too much, and I kind of still am, but just making sure that I unplug a little bit and check in with my other allies in Waterville Dems, Kennebec Dems, Maine Dems, who are are just as human and just as burnt out. They have their own strategies. They've been doing this for longer than I have, and have their own strategies for how to take care of themselves. So sometimes that means going on a long drive together and dipping our toes in the water. Other times that means getting some pancakes at 6 a.m. But really just my big thing was asking other people to teach me how to take care of myself, or asking them to help me set aside time with them for us to take care of ourselves together, because otherwise I always put the needs of everyone else ahead of my own. So if I'm able to have someone else hold me accountable to that by setting a time for the two of us to take care of ourselves together as a network or as a team, then that's really the way it's worked for me.
Oh, that's a great strategy, actually, to get someone to do it with you. Because I think that part of it, and this goes maybe to a bigger issue about women in politics at any level, is that if we ask for help, it's perceived as weakness or vulnerability. And I think that there's this thing, there used to be a poster, it's probably all before all of your times, but in order for a woman to be considered taken seriously in politics, she has to be twice as smart, twice as pretty, twice as whatever, all those things. And then the tagline was, luckily, that's not so difficult. And so, but talk about sort of the fear of that perceived or potential perceived weakness or vulnerability, or like that sort of, who do you think you are? Who do you think you are doing this? Did that play into any of you thinking about running or serving? Yeah, Lutie, I'm getting a nod.
Yes, it very much played into my running for office in Waterville, but also in all my other leadership positions. I feel, or I no longer feel, I have felt the need to come off as perfect and put together, as you said. I always had to prepare everything. I would put a lot of time into preparing my agendas for my Maine College Downs meetings and my national meetings, and knew that I could not let one word slip, or I could not mess up, because then that would affect my entire persona as a capable leader. And that was kind of terrifying. Even going into charter meetings, I put in several hours every week, not just doing the whole organizer stuff of talking to actual constituents and residents to hear what they have to say about what we're voting on that week, but also preparing my statements to make sure that I sounded as eloquent and put together as possible when I was going to comment on and take a position on something within the charter. Because otherwise, if I slip up at once, one person's going to call me out and just turn off their ears and not listen for the rest of my statement. So I definitely understand the impulse to come off as perfect and never with a flaw, but I actually think that I've become a much better and capable leader this year by becoming more human. So since charter, I burnt out a little bit, but in my Maine College Downs work, we just have more frank and casual conversations about how we're all doing. We have actual wellness checks at the top of every single meeting and Zoom call we have. And in those calls, I don't just say I'm doing okay. We don't just ask how are you and move on right away. We actually update each other on how we're actually doing and how we can support one another. Because as you said, these networks are so important, but we have to remember that we are all human beings first and foremost. And just by exposing my own vulnerability and sometimes, like, frankly, helplessness, there are moments in politics this year where I was just like, we tried our all, we gave it our all, and somehow it didn't work out, and what do we do next? And just by letting people know that we don't have all the answers gives them the space to pipe up and offer their own ideas, and then we can empower their voices and follow their lead going forward into our next adventure using their energy, because sometimes we just don't have that energy anymore, because especially after exposing our own mistakes or weaknesses or vulnerabilities, just being able to harness onto and support someone else's energy and uplift them even more is just part of the cycle that we have to continue as women in politics.
Yeah, wow. And Bev, vulnerability, weakness?
Oh, absolutely. So I'm still trying to figure out what happened my first year in city council, whether it was my own insecurities or was it sexism in play. The entire time I was on city council, I was the only female. And the management staff was all male. I was, other than the city clerk, I was the only female ever on the dais. And there was this other counselor, particularly my first couple of years, who would be very helpful. And I always felt like Yes, exactly. It was is he helpful or is he like proverbially patting me on the head?
Patronizing, right, right.
And I still haven't, and I don't know if that's my own insecurity of how I was feeling at the time. I finally had the conversation with him and said, you need to stop this. I know what I'm doing. I can read a budget and we're all good and we're all set. And so we
Yeah.
kind of we'll talk through it and it worked out. And I think it was a little bit of both. It was my own vulnerability and it was his own sexism going on. Uh, I will say that I still struggle with feeling vulnerable about this. The other day, so at commercial real estate, I couldn't get a door open.
Mm.
And I had to play the weak female while someone else got out the crowbar. And I had to tell my client, I was like, you can't tell anyone this because I'm the one that's supposed to be able to
Not
get
my
the door
jam.
no matter what, like there's
Right.
not a man that should be able to do this that I can't, that I can't do it. Yeah, and it's well, now I'm telling your entire TV.
Right. The huge audience that we have, right? Yeah, exactly.
I know.
Very good.
I played the weak female last week, couldn't get the door open. But it's still I'm successful. I've served in elected office. I've, done, I can look at all of these things I've done and I still think, oh God, don't tell anyone I couldn't get that door open.
Well, and don't you think that voters are sort of mixed too? Like I think we're in this transition phase, right? And I think a lot of people look at the three of you and say, yes, those are women. They have my experience. They know. They will pay attention. They'll listen. They got two ears and one mouth. They'll listen. They talk to me. They ask me questions. And so, yes, you're there, and they're human, and we want that. And I want someone who's human. And we also have this impossible standard that if we want you to, and we want you to not be, we want you to be just like me, but I want you to be strong and never have a hard time, and I want you to just act like it's all good and never not be able to open the door, or never want someone to go get you. I don't know. I feel like there's, as a culture, as a society, we're in this funny place where we want both things. We want someone real and vulnerable, but we also want someone to be on this pedestal that, and then once you're on the pedestal, it's just like they just take out the slingshot and they can't get it fast enough. So do you feel that dichotomy and those two things happening, Flavia?
Yeah, it's more like for me, it was more like in the beginning, it was like imposter syndrome.
Yes.
I had to because the woman here in Waterville didn't look like me. And even the woman that was serving didn't look like me. So in the beginning, I noticed myself trying to be like them.
Hmm.
So it was like changing who I am to become like them, to kind of get into the role. For me, that's what it was in the beginning. It was mimicking what I was seeing. And because there was nobody that looked like me prior to me, I was mimicking somebody else.
Yeah.
Until it was after the George Floyd thing happened, that I was challenged with equity and diversity. That's when I realized, hold up a second, I'm different. I'm
Yeah.
allowed to be different, and I'm allowed to have my own cultures, and I'm allowed to have my accent. I'm allowed to be like this. And then from that point on, it started in June. So from that point on, I've been working on myself, trying to figure out who I am and own that up. And I found that that's more empowering. That's
Yeah.
where I'm building my strength from. It's
Right.
from within.
Right. That's where your strength comes from. Right. And that's that. I mean, and that's that amazing thing is like um, when we stop, I think when you stop listening to, and it's hard in elected office, right? Because you have to appeal to people, but when you stop worrying about what people think and just sort of say the thing, come from your heart, come from who you are and why you have that passion. That's to me, that's the part that's so magnetizing for people, and it's like, oh yeah, yeah, I want that. I want
Yeah.
some of that, and I think that's what we're seeing more and more is people, even if it's not, even if your experience is not exactly my experience, right? It's still like the fact that you are talking about and living your experience and doing it out there and being on the front lines about it. That to me is like, oh yes, I'm with her, and I think we're moving in that direction. But I think sometimes we get caught, and people say, well, wait a minute, I don't know, and I think we
Yeah.
get caught in that,
Yeah, and I did get the pushback when I first got to Maine, because they were like, oh, where did she come from? And she was already moving up the ladder. Like, who is she? And stuff like that. But I had to remember why they chose me to run. And it's because of who I am. And if I started suppressing who I am, I was becoming somebody that they didn't want. They didn't choose that person, So I always had to come back to who I was.
Yeah, that's awesome. And that's right. When we come back to who we are, that's when you get to be like your most amazing superwoman, incredible self. So, all right. So I want to just ask, we're getting near the end, which seems like we could go on forever, which makes me so sad that we can't do that. But I want to talk about, I want to ask each of you a two-part question, which is sort of what was, describe to me like the yes moment, like the yes, this is it, or that moment where you're doing something in your elected capacity or your leadership capacity that's like, oh yeah, this is why I'm doing this. Yes. And then the second question, and we can maybe do that round first and then the second one. But so who do you have a mentor? Like, who do you look up to in politics? Who do you look to and say, yeah, I don't want to be them, but I want to learn how to, emulate the kind of leadership style or the kind of leadership that they have. So let's do two parts, but we have to go quick. So sort of lightning round. So what is a yes moment that you've had that you just inspires you to keep going? Deb, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah. Sorry.
So my first yes moment was a budget question, and it was about the bus. And we were having a really hard budget year, and the town manager wanted to eliminate Saturday bus. And I said, well, if you eliminate the Saturday bus, aren't you taking all of these people who need this, they need to work on Saturdays, or they need to go get their groceries on Saturdays. And we're struggling with foreclosed homes. And if we're not doing this, and I got the bus back by just having a quick conversation saying, you're not thinking this through. Like, you're thinking really short term, and you're not thinking about our families. And it was my first year, and it was one of those, like, I've got the power of influence because I could just talk to people about what I knew.
Yeah.
And that felt really good. So there's my
okay.
yes.
There's your yes. All right, Lutie, how about you? What's a yes moment for you?
Yeah, so my yes moment, my first what I thought was going to be a yes moment was not a yes moment. I went in guns blazing, ready to be on charter commission, and I was going to abolish the mayor's position and reform all of Waterville government. And of course, that didn't pass right away, and I didn't understand politics yet at 19 years old, so I didn't realize that I should probably hold off a little bit, create a team, and discuss things more before coming in with a big, bold idea like that. So that was of course a no, but then about 6 months later, we were actually able to pass a check on the mayoral power that kind of slid under the radar there. So we now need a super majority to pass a budget in the city of Waterville. So 5 out of 7 counts instead of 4 out of 7. And you need 5 out of 7 to override a mayoral veto. So this means that the budget could be passed sooner and therefore get to the citizens of Waterville sooner and we could avoid this political posturing that we sometimes see from the ceremonial mayoral position here in Waterville. So that was a big yes moment for me to go, oh, politics does pay off. I didn't give up on this dream. 6 months later, it could still become a reality, maybe in different terms and in a different way because politics is funky like that, but it did end up making a difference. And this is right around, like Flavia said, this is right around all of the BLM protests starting to spark up around the country, even here in Waterville. And I was really passionate about all of those issues, especially coming from my background. So this means that every time we come to budget season in Waterville, advocacy and activist groups will have even more power to lobby their individual city councilors to think harder about what they're voting on. And it's much harder to pass something like a ridiculous, egregious police budget in the city of Waterville. Now you need a supermajority in order to pass it. So that was a big yes moment for me. And I guess for the second follow-up question.
I'll come back to the second one. But I just want to say the coolest thing, yes moment, from Black Lives Matter protests into the street, translating into a charter commission, supermajority in the budget, like that is totally cool. That is just so awesome. All right, Flavia, what's your yes moment? Have you?
My yes moment for me, I think it's long term for my kids. My kids are going to be, my kids are part of the Waterville school system, so they're part of the Waterville community. So I want them to see representation of somebody that looks like them in the city government.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that's what keeps me going.
Oh, yep, it does. Oh, that's great. Okay, so now mentor or mentors, but who do you look up to as you go forward? So Lutie, I'll start with you because you were all ready.
Yeah, I think that I've already listed many of my amazing champions like Lily and Carolyn and Colleen and Henry and you, Betsy, really for getting me here to come to Maine to get involved in politics. But definitely Rachel Talbot Ross right now is my queen and my champion. She does not hold back. She holds on to her truth and she claims it in the way that Flavia was talking about. That is oh so important, especially now. It has inspired me to become a lot more vocal and to honor my truth and not try to perform to this idea of the perfect politician, but instead to talk about my own backgrounds, my own challenges, my vulnerabilities, and what I think we can do to change that, because Rachel Talbot Ross has taught me that my voice matters and so does everyone else's, and we have to not only listen to others and uplift their voices, but sometimes make sure that we sometimes ensure that our voices are heard as well.
Oh, that's awesome, Lutie. All right, Flavia, how about you? Who's the person that you look up to?
Okay, like I said, I didn't grow up in politics, and I came to the US in older. So my role model has been Oprah Winfield. She's been my role model since day one, since I came to America, and I pretty much just follow her, like integrity, vulnerability, listening. And she pretty much shaped me up to who I am today. Like I said, I didn't have the role model, and I don't have nobody for my country as a role model. So Oprah was it for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. We were asked this in graduate school once, and there was like 280 people in the room. I think 260 said Oprah. That's awesome. All right, Bev, to you.
I love this question. I've thought about it for days thinking it was going to come up. There are so many that I'm not even going to start. Let me say it's all the women and all the men, everyone who has helped along the way, who I've talked to, whom I've watched make the really tough decisions. Mm-hmm. Every step of the way. There's so many people out there to watch, to learn from. And I can't name just one. If I had to name just one, it would be Dad. There you go. Dad, the guy that never thought that any of us would do politics. We just talked about it.
Wow, that's awesome. All right, well, so there you have it, right? 3 amazing women who are doing amazing things in our state. And, there are many, many hundreds of more women who are serving every day, and men who are stepping up. And at this time in our history, when politics is tough, and when it's, it used to be that being a elected official was like a respected, honored, venerated thing, and now not so much sometimes. And so I'm so grateful to all 3 of you for what you bring to our state, what you bring to your communities, and what you teach us every single day. And in 1984, when I was at the Commission for Women, we had a conference that brought women together to encourage them to run. And one of the women who came to speak to that conference was Shirley Chisholm. And she was the first African-American woman to ever run for president in this country. She was Unbought and Unbossed was the name of her book. She was awesome, but she stood up in front of 300 women, including Shelley Pingree and Dale McCormick and Mary Cathcart, and none of whom were in office, and she stood up with her little self, and she just said in this bellowing voice, "Women, you put aside your petty reluctances and run." So in honor of Shirley Chisholm, in honor of all these 3 extraordinary women and all the women who are going to change this world. And I think it was the Dalai Lama who said, it's women who are going to save the world. And I think that that's really true. And I think we have 3 great examples of that. And so if you want to run, if you're even thinking about it, overcome all those internal voices that might say, oh, I don't know if I'm good. You're good enough, you're smart enough, and we need your voice. You can sign up for the Maine Dems. They have this free training called Run Local. and it's about running for local office, whether it's the school board or the planning board or the charter commission or city council or town council. Go learn to run. We are a built-in network, and I promise you, if you want to run, you reach out to any woman who's ever run or even thought about it, and you will have an instant network, because what we know is we need more of us. So thank you so much. Thanks, Flavia. Thanks, Lutie. Thanks, Bev. Thanks to the Maine Dems. Thanks to all the viewers of Maine Challenge. This has been an honor and a joy. So thank you so much, and I can't wait to see another one of these shows with 10,000 of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Betsy.
Thank you so much, Betsy.
Thank you very much, Betsy.
Yes, you're awesome. Thank you so much.
The views and opinions expressed on Maine Challenge are solely those of the program participants and do not necessarily reflect or represent the views and opinions of Lincoln County Television, its employees, or the producers of this program. Maine Challenge is a production of Lincoln County Indivisible.